Okay, we're talking about the future of investing, navigating opportunities in a changing landscape. Neeraj, Seth, Managing Director, Chief Investment Officer, and Head of Asian Credit at Blackrock is with me. Neeraj, great to see you. Let's talk about the key trends in global markets. Inflation is a massive trend. What's your view on the impact of persistent supply shocks on inflation?
Sure. So, well, inflation certainly is a big challenge and a trend. But one thing worth highlighting is that we're seeing much more of that impact in the developed markets rather than the emerging markets. So there's certainly something different on the back of the fiscal impulse and the monetary impulse we had in the developed markets during COVID. And alongside, we have the deglobalization, decarbonization, the demographics with aging demographics putting some pressure from a supply of labor. So I do think we have seen the end of the great moderation that started in the early 1980s, if you look at the US from an inflation impulse standpoint. And that has implication for the policy point forward and the fact that the rates will probably stay higher compared to the last 15 years. And that obviously means the higher cost of capital and hence different discounting for the cash flows when you think about businesses.
The influence of high rates then, Neeraj, in developed markets on asset allocation between developed and emerging markets?
Right. So from that angle, if we look at it today, we do obviously look at a lot of opportunities in the emerging markets, whether it's in the Latin America, Brazil, Mexico, or in Asia, whether it's India, Indonesia, Korea to some extent, where we do expect the monetary policy to actually be ahead of on the easing side, ahead of the developed markets, given the inflation impulse is not that strong. And then in case of US, given how much we have seen the increase in rates, and as we get closer to what I would call the tail end of the hiking cycle from the Fed, I think the front end of the curve in the US and the European market has started to look attractive. It does obviously have an implication on the equity markets too, where you continue to see the growth and the higher quality companies performing better given the uncertain macro environment and the higher cost.
China, Neeraj, how does it fit into your view, given we've had those recent monetary policy actions and some stimulus news? How do you view China right now?
I think overall, I would still be on the cautious side when you think about the macroeconomic backdrop and the policy mix in China. And if you look at the growth impulse post reopening, we had a pretty strong impulse in the Q1, but we have started to see a slowdown, and that's driven by a combination of three factors in my view. The first is the consumer confidence remains weak, and which is driven by the higher level of unemployment, the lack of wage inflation, the weakening of the real estate sector post the default in that overall sector over the last 2 years. The second is the corporate capex is still weak. And the third is there is no strong fiscal stimulus that we have seen from the government to actually stem the slowdown. So, overall, when you put it together, I do think we're still trying to find the right equilibrium for growth. And then obviously that has implication in terms of how the risk assets perform. And we've seen the weakness in that over the last few months.
Yeah, we've had some wonderful chats today, Neeraj, about geopolitics and where India sits in the global geopolitical framework. How do you see it? How does the current geopolitical backdrop, how does it impact India, and how well positioned is it to leverage these developments?
I think from a geopolitical perspective, India is an amazing place, and I cannot ask for more, to be very transparent. I think this is probably the best time you've seen in the history. Now, question is, how does it really play out? Now, from a practical perspective, the impact of geopolitics, when you think about it, which will have three broad impacts in my view: the supply chain realignment, the capital flows, and then the overall political realignments in the world. I think India is positioned quite well. The key here is going to be for India to continue on the path of further structural reforms, deepening of the capital markets, strengthening the investor protection framework to attract more in capital in terms of investments from the global organizations, global businesses into India. And to complement the exports part, which India can actually grow a lot from here, you do have a strong domestic economy, which is built on a combination of a stable macroeconomic, stable political backdrop, and a very strong demographic dividend. So, all in all, it's a great picture. Clearly, the government needs to keep delivering on reforms and keep strengthening the overall frameworks.
Yeah, we can't have a chat, Neeraj, without bringing up AI and its potential implication on markets. So, how do you see AI shaping investment decision making and asset allocation now versus the future?
Right. I do think we are still in the early stages of AI. If I look at what's happening, we still have a lot of uncertainty in terms of how it grows, how it plays a role in from a macroeconomic perspective. And if I take a step back and think about the second machine age, since that the starting point of technology and the basic, I would say, the foundation built on the semiconductor back in 1960s, in the fourth avoid confused baseball market. I still think there's a long way to go. And when you look at where we are, we obviously saw that semiconductor growth, then we had internet, we had then the growth of a lot of different productivity enhancing applications and the devices. And now we have AI and generative AI, which has a huge implication in terms of enhancing productivity to some extent, also dulling inflation and providing more growth impulse. And specifically in countries where you do see the labor market, labor shortages and constraints, it actually becomes a pretty big positive force. The only thing I would say, as I said, it's still early stages, so we have a long way to go. One question that I still feel unclear, at least in my head, is the countries and the government system, which is the
We seem to be having some audio issues.
system.
Yeah. Oh, apologies. I was just waiting to see if it would resolve itself, but I think those audio issues are persisting. Yeah. Okay. Apologies for that. Apologies, audience, physical and virtual. But the gist of that was wonderful. Great chat on key trends in global markets and AI and its potential implications. We were reaching the end of the interview anyway, so you didn't miss too much. But big thanks there to Neeraj, Seth, Managing Director, Chief Investment Officer, and Head of Asian Credit at BlackRock.